Umbrella Entertainment is an Australian distribution company, and they got a pretty cool site. You want to go check out their site. They got when they release a lot of things. Say for instance, this Terrifier box set that has the 3 Terrifier films in it to date. With a lot of times they'll put that out there, and they'll have like a bunch of extra stuff you can get. They have different bundles. They have like our standard bundle, which is just going to be your film with the slipcover. And then they have other bundles that have pretty cool stuff with it. Sometimes a special edition, making the box very thick. Now, today we are going to take a look at a new release from Umbrella Entertainment, which is Hardware. This is a 1990 science fiction post-apocalyptic thriller horror film directed by Richard Stanley. And if you look on their site, I opted just to get the slipcover version, but if you look on their site, they do have some pretty cool bundles with this. Some of them include booklets and things of that nature. And I probably should have opted to get that sort of stuff, but I didn't on this occasion. But Hardware is it's a pretty cool film. It's a cult film, and I'm gonna talk about the film. I'm gonna talk about this rewatch of it. I'm going to talk about my initial impressions of it, and we're eventually going to open this up, and I'm going to show you the inside and all that. And then I'm going to rate the film on a scale from 1 to 5, 1 being the lowest and 5 being the highest. And if you could do me a favor, go ahead and like this video, subscribe to my channel. I'm Dave Watkins, Watkins Films. Hardware is Richard Stanley's debut film as a director. I saw this a long time ago, plus I saw his next film, Dust Devil. But it's been a while, and I don't even remember Dust Devil very good at this point. But I did see a documentary about Richard Stanley. He was supposed to direct the Island of Dr. Monroe, the one that has Val Kilmer and Marlon Brando in it. He was supposed to direct that, and there's a pretty hilarious documentary about what happened, and it's called Lost Soul, The Doomed Journey of Richard Stanley's Island of Dr. Monroe. And it's a terrific documentary. I highly recommend checking it out. It's quite entertaining, and it sheds a lot of light on Richard Stanley in general, and the Island of Dr. Monroe, which I actually kind of like this version of it. A lot of people don't like it. I saw it in the theater. I was entertained by it. Now, recently, ever since that happened, he was outed, pushed out by the film studios. That was his first time trying to work with a film studio, like a bigger one, and it didn't go very well. He's more of an indie film director, and it didn't click right. He recently got another chance to make a film, and he did one. It's pretty good. It's based on H.P. Lovecraft's story, the Color Out of Space. Now, and he worked with Nicolas Cage on this one, and it's a fairly solid horror film, especially an H.P. Lovecraft horror film. It is a solid film. That's in 2019, and then after that, some kind of allegations came up from his ex-wife or girlfriend, him being abusive to her. So now he's been kind of caught up in some kind of court drama with all of that, and the studio's like, okay, now we can't touch him anymore. So he had a brief comeback, but now he's been canceled again. But let's talk about Hardware. Now, this is a 1990 horror film. I didn't realize it until recently this was his debut film. I thought Dust Devil was his first film, but this was his first film, and it's pretty good. It takes place in the far future where there's been some kind of nuclear disaster that's caused the sky to be red. Everything's red. There's radiation, and people are just kind of having to deal with it. Since this is 1990 and the internet wasn't really like a big thing here, it's all about TV. They're still into TV, like they're watching like TV channels. They're still doing like commercials and stuff on the television. So, and they're doing radio. There's radio guys. Iggy Pop plays a voice only. He plays a radio disc jockey or DJ who's announcing some things that help set up some of this world that they're living in. Some other insights we get, some little tidbits that are revealed through the radio and the television inserts, is that there's a big deal with overpopulation at this point. There's too many people, and they've actually been trying to pass some legislation to make it so people won't have babies anymore, or there's big consequences as if they have it. So the government, in their mind, think there are too many people on the planet, and we're to accept that based on kind of what we see. But I have my doubts about it as well. I mean, we see some people. And this is a lower budget film, so we don't see like an amount of overcrowdedness. We do see some people who have at one point some of the characters go into a big building that's been rammed into, and there's a bunch of homeless people laying around. But I mean, that's not like necessarily overpopulation. Maybe it is, but maybe it isn't. But sometimes sometimes it's just a political thing, and maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's not. I think from this film's perspective, I think it is actually saying there is an overpopulation problem, but at the same time, there's a little bit more. It doesn't show the government officials or anything. All of this is very well self-contained within the main characters of the plot, and a lot of it. They do a good job building the world. Richard Stanley does a good job of building some of the outside world before it gets into the biggest part of the film, which takes place inside of a kind of a higher up apartment. Before we get into the main plot, I'm going to come back to that in just a minute. I will talk about my first reaction to the film. I believe I saw it a long time ago, and I thought it is sort of got some horror aspects to it with this robot in the film, which we'll talk about here in just a minute, how that comes to be. But it is kind of a deliberately paced, but it is a pretty well done as far as the characters and the way that it builds this world, and then also the way that the characters act. My first watch of it, you expect them to be maybe more heroic, but they are more nuanced, and they are more these characters who are in this world of this really nasty world where things just aren't as they should be, and the characters aren't as they should be. And you expect, let's say, like Dylan McDermott, who gets top billing, you expect him to be more of a heroic character, but he's also very selfish, and in some ways, like, he's also, he is more of an adventurer, and he doesn't want to stay there with his girlfriend, who lives in this protected high-rise apartment sort of thing. Not a very nice one, but for this world, it is pretty nice, and she is protected, and that's an important thing for this world. Now, I saw that a long time ago, and I think that some of those aspects kind of were a little off-putting to me, especially the way that the characters are ultimately dealt with. But now I have a better appreciation for the whole thing, and I think that this does kind of, it maybe feels a little bit like a lot of other films, whether it be like Terminator or Aliens or whatever, but in like a lower budget version of that. But I think it is different in a way. But I think there's more to it than just a rip off, and it doesn't really feel that way to me. I think it's the way that it's shot and the way that it looks. It all looks really dirty and dusty and authentic. Like, I think there's something to be said here for indie films, and he does whatever. He takes like a smaller budget and he makes it look fairly substantial. So the first shot of the film, we see a couple random close-ups of who turns out to be the main character, Jill, played by Stacey Travis. But just a few brief snippets of her. Then it goes into the opening credits, which are over this kind of dusty, kind of red-ass looking desert type of place. We see like a lone guy in a bunch of gear. He's got like a mask on and all this other stuff, and he's out scavenging the desert looking for stuff. This character is known as a zone tripper within the film. That's what he's called. But he's also billed as a nomad zone tripper. But so this guy comes up and he finds an area of barbed wire, and then he cuts in there, and then there's all these kind of landmines all over. This guy's very, very good with going around the landmines, and he finds where something has been destroyed or blown up by the landmines, which they call frag mines, I believe. But he finds like a head to a robot. It's like the robot head here, and there's also a few other parts like a hand and all this. So he takes all that and puts it in a bag, and he goes and he leaves. Back in town, we're introduced to kind of our main characters, Mo and Shades. Mo is played by Dylan McDermott. He's also named, his friend calls him Max, and Shades calls him Max. Now, Shades is played by John Lynch. I hadn't seen John Lynch in very many things. I remember him being in the film Sliding Doors. He plays like Gwyneth Paltrow's character's boyfriend, who's kind of he's actually more nuanced in that film than you would expect, but he's kind of a cheating boyfriend, and it's fairly nuanced performance by him, and he's pretty good here. And they call him Shades because he always wears sunglasses. But he's walking with Mo or Max, Dylan McDermott's character, and they go into this shop with this guy named Alvy runs the shop, and then they're trying to sell some things to him. They picked up some things themselves. They wanted to now this is a big, before they go in there's like a big junkyard area that they're walking through. Now that seems to be the thing in this world, is like they're just, people are going around picking up old parts, and they're going places and repurposing them. because I guess there's not as much, there's probably very little, if no manufacturing going on because of the situation, this post-apocalyptic situation. But people are just kind of making the best out of what's left. So they go in there and they're talking to Alvy. Alvy takes the stuff they brought in, goes back in the bag. Then the zone tripper comes in with his bag with the robot head in it, and then they see him, and then they end up buying the stuff from him, and then he leaves. And then Alvy comes back out, and then they sell Alvy most of the stuff with exception of the head of the robot. And then he like Mo, Dylan McDermott's character Mo, wants to bring that back to his girlfriend. Now he's been out doing his adventures, like he can't just stay put with his girlfriend Jill. So he's been out doing his adventures, and he figures if he shows up with this robot head or just with something, just a gift. She is a sculptor, and she likes to collect different parts of things and sculpt them up in her apartment. But another thing too, this is, I guess it's kind of technically a Christmas movie because he's like, it's Christmas, I don't want to show up empty-handed. Now, there are no Christmas decorations to be seen anywhere, and Christmas is only mentioned a couple times earlier on, but some people might go as far as to consider this a Christmas movie, kind of like the Night of the Comet. That is technically kind of a Christmas movie. Now, there is more Christmas stuff in that film, but it's still kind of odd that they try to incorporate Christmas into these kind of post-apocalyptic films when it doesn't feel anything like Christmas. I think an interesting thing about Christmas, though, and even in these sort of scenarios, people are still trying to hold on to these things that might make them happy, even in a terrible situation that they're having to deal with or they're having to redo, and they're still kind of holding on to these traditions that tend to bring, in most instances, bring around some kind of type of happiness. But here he's got the head, and so they go in, him and Mo and Shades go, they travel from Alvy's shop, and then they have to go back to her apartment. And so we get to see a lot of the world as they're going through this. Now, once they get to the apartment, most of the film takes place up in the apartment around the complex, so it's kind of self-contained once they get there. But it's nice the way they build the world up beforehand. So he gets back to the apartment, and Shades goes back to his own place, which is apparently in the same sort of unit or complex as that Jill lives in. And so he gives her the robot head, and she's fairly impressed with it. I mean, she's trying to hold back her excitement because there is some tension going on here. She's very upset that he leaves and then doesn't come back for long periods of time, and she's like having to hang out by herself in this odd world where people are just kind of dicks and they're trying to mess with her. She kind of keeps to herself for the most part, which is a smart thing to do because there's some pretty sleazy people hanging around here, including one of her neighbors that spies on her. He's able to spy on her through a window. It's kind of like some rear window sort of stuff. But this guy's a real sleazebag, and he's like a big kind of horn dog played by William Hootkins, and he's an odd dude, and he actually calls her and says like really nasty stuff to her on the phone about like fucking her in the ass or something. I don't know, but he's a real interesting character who's not very likable. but more on him. He eventually comes in there and at a bad time, and then he gets his just desserts. But as far as the plot of it, so he gives her this head, and what this thing is. A part of a Mark 13 android that the government's created, and that's figured out during the course of the film. I know Alvy's doing some back at his place. It goes back to Alvy's place, and he's been doing some research on it and figuring out more about it. This is a new prototype droid. Now they have these kind of police droids that go around, but this is a Mark 13 is a very new one, and it's a little different than the other ones. It's a very, very dangerous one. This one can actually repair itself from its head, and so she takes the head and she paints it. I'm going to go ahead and open this a little bit so I can show you what the head looks like when she paints it. But she paints it, and it looks like it's got this kind of a American flag looking thing on the head of the robot. But then she takes it and she puts it as part of her sculpture she has on the wall, which is built with a bunch of different parts. This robot can reassemble itself or make itself new from parts. So it starts to reassemble using her sculptor stuff. It starts to reassemble itself into a different form. It'd be a different robot than it originally was, but it starts to reassemble and use her parts to rebuild itself. Alvy calls Mo and tells him he needs to come back in there with the head. He's found out some stuff. So Mo leaves, but he leaves the head. but and then he has to leave to go back and talk to Alvy. And meanwhile, while that's happening, this robot fully assembles himself and makes himself look all like spider-like, and then he starts to attack Jill, and eventually that weird dude from across the hall comes in there, and he just kind of comes in all like weird like, and then he ends up being part of. He said he was part of the security company that built the security system, so he's able to hack, because the robot makes it so you can't open the door anymore. And he starts trying to hack out of it, and eventually the robot attacks him. And so I'm not going to go through the whole plot, but it's basically most of it takes place in there, and it kind of reminds me a little bit, because it takes place in the apartment like that. It kind of reminds me a little bit of the other post-apocalyptic film I spoke about recently, Delicatessen. It's not quite as, it doesn't have the edge or the dark comedic edge that Delicatessen has, but there is a little bit of dark comedy here. Maybe it can be intended as dark comedy, especially the way these characters are treated ultimately. But let's go ahead and finish taking a look at the packaging here. Now, like I said, you can go to the Umbrella site and get like a really awesome package. This is just really a slipcover, a new design on the slipcover, and then here's the, which I really like this design here. I like this, the way it shows the robot's head with the flag on the inside version of this. Here's the original cover. No, it's not the original cover. I don't know why I said that. This is the new. It's the only difference between this side and this side is Australia has this. It has to put the rating on the front, where you don't have to in the U.S. On the inside of it, we have two discs. We have a Blu-ray and a 4K. And I did take a look at both of them to compare the difference in the quality of it. Now, the 4K looks very nice. Now, I did like the quality of it is a little bit of an uptick between the Blu-ray and the 4K. Now, the biggest thing about the 4K is it does have HDR. The HDR makes everything look more lifelike. Now, this film does have a lot of grading, or maybe it was shot with these colors, like leaning towards red, because you're outside and the sky's red. Even inside, it leans a little bit more. It leans more towards red, but it all looks very, very post-apocalyptic in general. And I think it has a nice dusty feel to it. And the 4K really brings out some of the textures, and you see a lot more detail better. The blacks are much deeper in the 4K than they are in the Blu-ray, but the Blu-ray is taken from probably the same source master. It's probably a 4K makeover taken to Blu-ray, so it looks good too. So they both look fairly solid, and the blacks are very deep, and everything looks pretty good here for this. And with it being shot on film, you do get some grain in there, but it's not over amount of grain. It looks fairly clean. I will say, eventually in the third act of the film does get fairly violent with the robot, and several people are killed fairly gruesomely. Now, what's interesting about the whole plot is that the government has they find out that they have created this machine as a kind of a genocide machine to go out and just annihilate a lot of the human population, because they feel that the population is overdone. So that's kind of the bigger theme of the movie. Now, the characters in the film are able to destroy this one robot, but there's more coming. So it's even though they put a lot into trying to destroy this one, it took a lot to do it, and a lot of people died, and a lot more people were going to die because of these things. But anyway, I think that's an interesting theme, and it's an interesting theme to explore. And it's a fairly scary one as well, once you start getting people thinking that the population's too big and they got to do something about it, because you never know what they're going to do. But let's go ahead and rate the film. I'm going to rate this film. I'm going to give it 3.5 stars, and it is a cult film. That may seem a little low for some people, but I would say it kind of leans towards 4. But I do think it's the pacing is deliberate. It takes a long time for anything really kind of violent, if that's what you look for. But I do have a bigger appreciation for just the subtleties in the building of the world, and I do like the way the characters are kind of handled differently than you would expect them to be handled, as you would expect like the Mo character to be the hero at the end. And he kind of is, and he's kind of not. He kind of fulfills his own part. I'm not going to drop everything about the character beats in the film. I do like the way the 3 main characters are handled, and that the Shades character ends up going back to his apartment and taking a bunch of drugs, and he kind of he eventually has to kind of come help, but he's having a hard time because he seems, I didn't realize it earlier on, he kind of acts that way to begin with. He's kind of a laid back guy walking around talking to Mo earlier in the film. He seems to be kind of not caring that much about anything that's going on, so he seems to be kind of laid back, but this is because he's probably more thinking about going back and doing those drugs. And then even Jill does a lot of drugs. She hangs around in her apartment, smokes like some kind of dope or something like that. So they're kind of like dependent on substances to that nature so they're not getting completely bored, I guess. Anyway, so yeah, 3.5 stars on this. Umbrella. They did a great job here. I'll give them 4 for this one. Now, if I was to buy the bigger bundle, I would probably give them more like a 5 because that bundle is terrific. I just didn't necessarily want to pay for it for this film. I did go all in on the Terrifier one just because it was a three movie set, but this one, I believe that higher ended one was $110, and it had a bunch of cool stuff, and it had some like 2 different books with it, but. I thought the movie was fairly solid, and this is on watching it this time I had a better appreciation for it. Last time, I think the first time I watched it, I did like it. I just was I think the ending kind of left a little something to be desired. This was my thought on the original watch, but I think it actually works very well this time, and I see what Richard Stanley was going for with how he ends it and what he's doing with it. Anyway, if you've seen this film or if you've taken a look at this new Arrow 4K release, let me know your thoughts on it. And if you would go ahead and like this video and subscribe to my channel. I'm Dave Watkins. Thanks for watching.